Hey Reddit, what are some of your first-hand experiences with unexplained phenomena? Not including stories you've been told by your parents or relatives, what are some experiences or sightings you have had that you can't explain? My déjà vu: in the 9th grade I sat in my English class waiting for the lesson to begin. My teacher always liked to take 10 minutes at the beginning of class to just talk about everything and anything. So this one particular day he begins with the story of his friend that was supposed to be on a flight, but cancelled at the last minute when he had a dream of a plane crash. The small plane took off without him and later crashed. He then told us a story about a robbery that had occurred at his house a few years prior. He said he woke up in the middle of the night when he heard footsteps in the hallway. He picked up his baseball bat, named Charlene, he kept beside his bed, and when the crook opened the bedroom door my teacher shattered his forearm with the baseball bat. After he was done telling us these stories he began his lecture but was immediately interrupted by a seagull smacking into the window of our classroom. The next day I came to class and sat at my desk. My teacher began his 10-minute talk. He started with the story of his friend who had a dream of a plane crash. I put up my hand halfway thought the story, realizing that I've heard this before and that the teacher must have forgotten he had told us already. But as I'm telling him that he told us this story my classmates looked at me and said no, he didn't. So my teacher finishes his story, and then segues into his next story. About a robbery that occurred at his house a few years prior. This time I beat him to the punchline and say you told us this yesterday. You break the guy's arm with a baseball bat. Again, my classmates look at me and one guy tells me to shut up. My teacher says well yeah, I broke the guy's arm with a baseball bat. Did I tell you already? I tell him he told us yesterday and that his baseball bat is named Charlene. He's baffled I know the name of his bat. But again everyone seems to deny he ever told us this. I can't believe what is going on. I begin to laugh, thinking that I'm going crazy. So I say no. Watch. A seagull is going to hit our window within the next 2 minutes. Of course nobody believes me and this punk tells me to lay off the crack pipe. The class settles down and my teacher starts his lesson. 5 seconds later a seagull hits the window. TL, Dr. I predicted and announced the future. Edit just to note, I am an atheist. I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in extraterrestrials visiting Earth. Also, I always think of the seagull as a coincidence. A lot of those flying rats nest on the school roof. But that doesn't change the fact I knew how his second story ended, and the specific name of his baseball bat. Let me first say I'm a skeptical atheist and my only conclusion is we must have made it up and our brains tricked us into making it a real memory, but it's an extremely vivid memory my friend and I both have. We were about 9 or 10 years old and we were talking on the phone. It was a little after 7 at night, in the winter, and it was dark outside. While we're talking, we both see out windows start to glow, like there's a bright light outside. It starts dim, builds slowly, then suddenly gets blindingly white and disappears. We live just one street away from each other, so we're wondering what the hell we just saw. That's when I look over at the clock and realize it's 10:30. He said his clock matched mine. 3 hours seemed to pass in a few seconds, and the next day there was a circle burned into the grass of a field next to us about 15 yards in diameter. It freaked us out enough we never told anyone else about it, but to this day we both remember it exactly the same. And to reiterate, I don't believe something paranormal happened, I just don't know what did happen. Deja vu, already dreamed, all the time, hearing what people I'm talking to are about to say or are thinking at the time, and 2 big ones. 1. My first American house. It was big, built in the late 19th century, and was home to something like 6 questionable deaths and a sacrificed cat in the dining room. Seriously, a sacrificed cat. One day in my bedroom, we placed a ceramic crucifix on the wall. 2 minutes later, it was broken against the opposite wall and pieces were embedded in the ceiling. 1B When you left something on a counter, you had to tape it down with duct tape. Otherwise you would come back to find that it had decided to move to one of the walk-in closets. 1C We'd find white cat hair in the dining room all the time. We had no white cats. Once, a large red stain was on the northern wall for upwards of a day. 1D A dresser from the basement that screamed when we burn it. 1E A lad, who himself was unexplainable in his gifts, took my mother aside and told her that it would be best if I moved in with my father, as somehow I was born with a much stronger electrical presence than most. Substory, after I lost my virginity, we blew out 2 or 3 electrical sockets by touch, and in some way I was acting like a portal and magnet for whatever or whomever was in that house. 1F Cold spots, dropping upwards of 20 C, would linger at random for minutes at a time, during which they had an EMP effect where all electronics within the area would die out. I lost a ton of Super Nintendo saves due to this. One night I woke up in one of the basement's rooms, scared to death because I had dreamed that I was swimming in a pool of blood. The next day, a painter that we had hired to redo the first 2 floors attempted to kill himself in the room. One night I woke up in the kitchen with the phone in my hand. I asked who was on the other end, and the 9 to 11 operator said to hold tight and that the fire department was on their way. Someone had torched the basement, which was far below the kitchen so you couldn't smell smoke. This one is particularly disturbing for me. I woke up on the stairs to the basement and for the next month or so had a strong affinity for the name, Maria. Every time I said Maria, a cold spot would appear. I used it to clear the couch whenever I wanted to watch TV. Odd house. 2. I can't find a good link about this, but I was in Denver/Kokomo, Indiana during the 16th of April, 2008 UFO sightings. A triangle in the sky was moving south, orange balls everywhere, and apparently there was a crash on the northern end of Kokomo. All functions of the Kokomo emergency responders came out to it, but were sent away with an NDA by the feds. Here's a poorly worded blog post I found on it. 3. This is Google's theme for today when I went to search for information on the Kokomo incident. My grandfather was a respected Buddhist monk in the southern region of the US. When he passed away, dozens upon dozens of monks from around the country came in to pay their respects, and every non-married male in my family became temporary monks for a week as a sign of respect. One evening, my uncle, a few of my cousins and myself were conversing with one of the higher-ranked monks, and he started talking to my uncle about his life. At first, we were all interested because he was telling my uncle information like the date when he was born, various locations of birthmarks on his body and so on, nothing too crazy, although it was hilarious for the rest of us. But then the monk starts lecturing my uncle for the things he had been doing, and my uncle didn't really think much of it at first. Then the monk begins to tell the story of how my uncle, in his early 20s, stole a car, describes how he flipped it into a ditch, and then how my uncle had to lie to his wife about how he got a concussion. My uncle says he had never told anyone this story before. The monk proceeds to do this to all of us. We had never met this particular monk before, and it was amazing that he was not only nailing exact birth dates. I was probably 16 or 17, so I didn't have any crazy secrets like my uncle, but the monk did tell everyone exactly where I hid my money, which I thought at the time was a spot no one would ever find. Also, I don't believe in superstition/ghosts/voodoo etc. Once I was driving to work. Suddenly, I blurted out Fond du Lac, which I have subsequently found is a place in Wisconsin. This took me by surprise, because I am not prone to blurt out obscure place names to myself whilst driving. That evening, I was driving home, doing 80 in the passing lane. I was passing a trailer truck, got halfway up the trailer, and on the trailer right in the middle it said Fond du Lac, which took me so much by surprise that I hit the brake to make sure I wasn't seeing things. As I looked at the truck, something happened in lane 1, and the truck swerved hard over into my lane. Because I had already braked, I was able to avoid, narrowly, being run off the road or crushed, who knows, by the truck as it ran into my lane. Fond du Lac. True story. No witnesses. This was in 1995 at the end of December. I was driving with my brother and sister in the car. We were about 2 minutes from my mom's house on a road I knew well. It was around 10 o'clock at night. A green light flashed from out of the sky onto my car. The diameter of the light on the ground was about 20 feet, 6 meters. There were 3 flashes that lasted about 1 second with about a second between them. I was driving about 35 miles per hour, 50 kilometers per hour, and all 3 flashes were centered on my car. The light was bright enough that it illuminated the whole inside of the car. None of us said anything until we got out of the car at my mom's house, when I muttered something like "that was totally insane," and my brother and sister quickly agreed. My mom's house was full of people over for Christmas, but we walked in and said nothing about it. One of the craziest experiences of our lives had just happened 2 minutes before, but we didn't say a word about it. In fact, none of us even remembered it at all. I left to go hang out with friends, and while hanging out I remembered what had happened. When I got back around midnight I asked my brother and sister if they had said anything about it, and neither one had. They remembered what had happened, but in "oh yeah" kind of way. We told my mom and whoever else was still up. The most bizarre part was how none of us remembered it walking into that house full of people. My wife's is sensitive to paranormal stuff, so things are happening all the time around here. This past week we lost a very beloved cat and had 4 ghostly incidents. We had just found out the cat had a tumor, and my wife was taking video of me with the cat on my lap. An orb descended from the ceiling and shined across the area of the cat where the tumor was. The following day, with the cat's health fading, he was laying under the dining room table and my wife went under there to be with him. She said their heads were 4 or 5 inches apart. She heard very clearly the sound of tiny bells ringing, right there in the small space between their heads. The cat heard it too. The next day we dropped him off for surgery to remove the tumor, and returned home. A few minutes before the cat went under the knife, my wife saw 2 orbs go across the room. She grabbed her camera and started shooting video, saying, "I saw it in motion. If you're here, please show yourself." When we played back the video, we could hear a woman's voice loudly whisper, "Hear me." It's kind of superimposed over my wife's voice, but very clear and distinct. The final incident happened a few minutes after we got the phone call telling us the cat didn't survive the surgery. We were sitting on the floor with our other cat and my wife felt a very distinct nudge in her back, exactly like the cat who just died used to do. I was the biggest skeptic in the world until I started living with my wife. And when she would tell me things she saw or heard, I would always try to offer some rational possible explanation. But my own eyes and ears convinced me this crap is real. The thing that enlightened me happened before we were married. We had just laid down to bed and turned the lights off. It was no more than a minute later that we both heard a strange sound emanating from 2 corners of the bedroom, up near the ceiling. It sounded like something warping in from another dimension. The sound built to a loud crescendo and at the instant it stopped, the lamps on each side of the bed came on. Yeah, I was freaked. But so many things have happened over the years, we're almost used to it. Stuff has happened in 3 different houses, so it's not the location, it's my wife. The whole family is sensitive to paranormal events. In my junior year of high school I woke up suddenly one morning without my alarm clock. This never happens. I sleep like a rock, requiring an actual system of alarms that go off at 10-minute intervals to make sure that in case I hit snooze on one of them in my sleep I'll have a backup. Anyway, I share a room with my sister, who wasn't in the room when I woke. The light next to my bed was on, placing me in a little circle of light in the middle of the darkness of the rest of the house. Usually the kitchen light is on because my mom gets up for work. I got up and went out through the living room and kitchen in the dark. I headed toward my parents' room because I couldn't figure out where my sister might be. At their doorway I turned back to check the bathroom in my brother's room. The bathroom was dark and empty and my brother wasn't in his bed. He usually didn't get up until later than us because he was in middle school. There was no reason why he would be up. I went back through the house toward my parents' room thinking they all must be in my mom's bathroom while she was getting ready. The bathroom light was off. My parents' bed was empty. I freaked out and went back toward my room where the only light in the house was. As I passed the living room an inhumanly tall, thin dark figure warped from the hallway to directly in front of me. It wasn't physical, more of a shadow, but it bore down on me and then circled me faster than any creature could have. It was gone almost immediately and I was so freaked out that I didn't even notice until I got back in my room that all of the normal lights were on, the kitchen, the bigger light in my room and one in my parents' room. My sister was in my room when I entered, standing in front of the mirror. I was so confused and shaken that I didn't say anything to her. I just went to my brother's room where he was sleeping in his bed. When I went back out I saw my mom in the kitchen. The only way I can explain this is that I never did wake up. The fact that I felt like I had woken up so suddenly is the first clue to that. The shadow thing could have been my fear making me anthropomorphize something inanimate, enhanced by the fact that I was sleeping in the first place. A few years ago I was home, visiting for 2 weeks from college, and my cat of 14 years got severely sick. I did/spent everything I could, but the day after I left I got a call saying she had died. Fast forward to last year. I'm living back at home and have 2 new healthy cats plus the family dog, who came to us as a puppy, 17 to 18 years ago, same time that we got my old cat. I'd been having weird experiences with animals since my old cat died, nothing big, just we seemed to connect better, and 2 things happened that year that really freaked me out. I was going on a trip to Canada, again, 2 weeks, and I was putting on my shoes in the living room as my family put my bags in the car. My dog and I hadn't had a good relationship for the last decade or so. He bit me in the face when I was a kid, completely my fault. Since then we've been more like acquaintances, but for some reason he came up to me and sat down on my foot. He panted for a bit, then looked up at me like goodbye and let me pet him. I told my family I thought he was going to die while I was gone. He did, purely accidental, in an awful way. I got the call the day before I was scheduled to come back. Lastly, my sister got a new puppy for her kids about a month after our dog died. I came over to see him. He was a healthy, happy puppy, but I got a weird feeling about it. I told my sister I thought he was going to die, A few days later he did, from an illness the pound had neglected to inform her he had. Those two things really freaked me out. They were both heartbreaking but also extremely unsettling. My mother likes to remind me about the night before I left, many years ago, and how my cat had climbed the stairs to stay with me before I left despite having not eaten in a few days and being very weak. She says she give me a gift. My mom's real old school about stuff like that. I don't really believe her, but I thought it fit here. Edit. Note, my sister got another puppy. They had me come by the house before they showed him to the girls. I got no weird feeling, and he's still alive. I thought that was funny that they depended on my okay. A few stories, sorry, it's turned into a big TL, doctor. 1. I was out with a buddy, out the time Family Guy first premiered, and on the drive home we were talking about it, how we didn't like it as much as The Simpsons, but that it had potential, yada, yada, yada. I drop my buddy off at his house, head home, a very short drive away. I wake my wife up from a deep sleep. She says she had a dream that I was out with this buddy, and we were talking about the Family Guy, and how it was good, and showed potential, but we didn't like it as much as The Simpsons. There were other things she recalled in the conversation, pretty much verbatim. Neither of us had a cell phone on us, we were in a car, and I got home so fast there's no way he could have called her to relay it. It sent shivers down my spine. On a couple of other occasions she did pretty much the same thing, knowing exactly what was going on when she wasn't there. Only about 3 times total, but it was very freaky when it happened. 2. Another oddity, when I first moved to Toronto to work for IBM, I met a fellow on the plane and we started chatting. He was also going to house hunt for moving to work for IBM. No big coincidence there. But then one thing after another kept showing up as a parallel. Driving around Toronto independently, we kept showing up at the same places at the same time, again, not totally unsurprising, looking at the same for rent ads. We ended up independently renting the apartments above/below each other. We got to know each other a bit. Both our fathers worked in forestry, both our mothers worked in hospitals. We both had wives working in the financial sector. He had a cat named Mookie, we had a cat named Mookie. WTF. Just wandering around Toronto, he and his wife, I and my wife, would frequently stumble across each other. Not in itself bizarre, but with the frequency it happened, combined with the other stuff, kinda seemed odd. Over the next 10 years or so, I moved away to another province. On about 3 occasions, we ended up on the same plane, running into each other at the same conferences, etc. At that point, we just kind of laughed it off as no big surprise there, it was becoming so commonplace. Looking at some university old grad photos, about 10 years later, I noticed he was fairly prominent in the background of a few photos of me and my few family members. Not quite photobombing, but prominent enough in the background of a small group photo that it seemed strange, especially given the other coincidences. We were in completely different disciplines, too, commerce versus engineering. Again, nothing specific that is that surprising, but an incredibly number of similarities that makes one scratch his head. 3. I've also experienced seeing a huge triangle that blacked out the sky, moving slowing, with lights at each corner. This seriously freaked me out. I heard many reports of the same the next day, in the direction it was headed. I guess the black triangle thing isn't that unusual, and probably had to do with military stuff. But damn, it seemed huge to me, and totally silent. 4. Other than that, the creepiest thing I experienced was when I was young, being afraid of the dark, and my sister let me sleep in her bed with her. Shut up you pada bear folks, it wasn't like that. In the morning light as the sun was just rising, I remember seeing her door open by itself, her dresser drawers open and close by themselves, and then the bedroom door close again. It was very disturbing at the time, but I never said anything about it, and had kind of written it off as a bad dream or something. 10 years later or so, talking with my sister about strange phenomenon, she described the exact same experience, which we had never discussed between us before. Another spine-tingling moment. Maybe it didn't actually happen, but the independent shared recollection is an interesting mystery nonetheless. 5. More recently, my girlfriend, not the ex-wife mentioned above, was staying over one night, and in the morning she told me she had a dream that her mother had died, and came to her in her sleep to say goodbye. You know where this is going. The call came a bit later that morning, and her mom had suddenly passed away during the night. She hadn't been in ill health or anything. 6. Night after having our kitty put down for severe illness, my wife and I are laying in bed, all windows closed, and the bedroom door creaks open all the way like it used to every night when Kitty would push it open and come in. No breeze, no open windows, quite a new house. The door just opened by itself. Never did it before, and didn't do it since, just that one night after we had Kitty put to sleep. 7. Bought an old house, possibly a good chunk of 100 years, no one can really tell us, bought surprisingly/incredibly cheap. During Halloween, we heard a couple of kids on the street saying "I'm not going to that house," which creeped us out a bit. I knew the former owner was someone's elderly parents, but I never got into details of why the house went on the market. It was in good shape, and a great deal, $19,000 CDN. Winter evening, girlfriend downstairs taking a shower, I'm upstairs in the bedroom working. After her shower, she comes up asking why I was banging violently on the bathroom door while she was in the shower. I didn't, and I didn't hear anything, and it's a small house. Maybe chalk this one up to the cats or a water hammer in the pipes, never had that happen, though that we've noticed. She swears it was me banging on the door. I know I never went downstairs, nor did I hear anything. One of my kids, during a weekend visit, left a large career manual from school here, listed every career possible, salary ranges, etc., big book. I knew she'd want it back next time she was over, so I carefully set it on an end table in the corner. Next morning it was on my coffee table, open to a page part way through. No one else was home. Maybe some bizarre wind, maybe the cat was learning to read, maybe I sleepwalk/read, or maybe the spirits think I have a future in the oil/gas industry. I've actually subsequently taken on a contract closely tied to the oil/gas industry. 8. Okay, one more. I was resigning from a fairly long-term job, 7 years, long for me, where I worked remotely most of it. I flew up to meet with my boss, and resign, and such. My wife and I were joking beforehand, that I should pull a Jerry Maguire and give a big rambling tirade on the way out. I'd never do that. I loved the company I worked for, but it was a funny thought, and the movie was popular at the time. On the drive back to the airport, I go to give her a call to jokingly tell her I did the Jerry Maguire thing. Apparently I misdialed, and I get an answering machine. "You have reached the residence of Gerald Maguire, blah, blah, blah. WTF. Looking it up in 411 after I got home, there was indeed a Gerald Maguire whose phone number was the same as ours, with 2 digits transposed. Bizarre coincidence. I was renting an apartment with a guy I'll call Fat Pete. On this particular weeknight I was upstairs in my bedroom with the door shut and about to fall asleep, but I kept hearing rustling in the kitchen downstairs. Drawers and cabinet doors seemed to be obsessively opening and closing. This went on for about 10 minutes and I was beginning to get frustrated because I was trying to get to sleep and I figured Fat Pete was on another drinking binge and now looking for food, or cooking. I didn't want to go downstairs and confront him because he was a big fat jerk and all I wanted to do was get to sleep. A drawer would open, I could hear the knives and forks jostled about, then the drawer would shut. Same thing with the cabinet doors, open shut open shut. When you live in a place for a while you get to know sounds pretty well and I was certain this is what was happening. Just about the time I decided I couldn't take it anymore I began to get out of bed but heard him shout to his girlfriend, who was staying with him that night, "They're here." And he bounded out of his room and down the stairs. He had called the police because he and his girlfriend heard the noises too. They had peeked out their door, saw my door was shut and the lights downstairs were off and decided it must be an intruder. He grabbed his keys, ran to the door and unlocked it. 2 cops burst in and fanned through our small apartment. There was one back door, bolted shut with a key, as was the front door, and no signs on forced entry. In fact, being a drafty apartment I had temporarily sealed all the windows for the winter with a kind of shrink-wrap plastic film that is made taut and transparent when you hit it with a warm hair dryer. There was no way someone could have gotten in those windows without leaving obvious evidence. The police searched the place and found no one. There was no possible way anyone could have gotten in or out with the key-bolted doors and sealed windows. The police found no evidence of entry, either. I heard the noises independently of him and his girlfriend. So what the hell was it? I was living in Manhattan and unemployed and money was getting real tight. I had been taking a nap on a Saturday afternoon and had a dream in which my father and I were walking down a country road, Indian Opie style. In my dream, my dad said something to me which was financial advice, which was very strange because my father never said anything to me while he was alive, like how to throw a ball or be a man, much less how to deal with money. I woke from the dream and was hungry. There was no food in the apartment so I go downstairs to the bodega across the street and get something to eat. As I'm walking back to my building, I see that there are a few pieces of mail dropped on the sidewalk. I pick them up very quickly and take them up to my apartment, hoping no one saw me pick up what was obviously not mine. I get back to my apartment and can tell that one of the envelopes contains a credit card. I open it up and it's a gold American Express card. I read the letter inside and ascertain that some guy who lives in the city was mailing the card out to his wife who is living in East Hampton. I begin to contemplate how easy it would be to go on a shopping spree in Manhattan with this newly found American Express card. I begin to fantasize how I can go to Barney's and get a new suit for a job interview, and go buy a new computer, and I can get groceries, and I could get myself out of these financial straits I was in, and Amex would eat the cost. I had never done anything like this before or ever been in trouble with the law, but I was getting desperate. Then suddenly, I remembered the dream I had just a half hour ago and the advice my father gave me walking down the country road. He had said only 5 words to me in my dream: leave the credit card alone. I cut up the card and threw it in the garbage. Well, this is a story my friend once told me of when he lived in New York. He lived in a pretty bad neighborhood where the cops would be called in every day. This one day him and his 3 sisters went down to the basement and saw an accordion and decided to put it in the street as they didn't want it. They were roughly 9 to 12 years of age. Later that night it was storming and they saw the accordion get struck by lightning, and got a good laugh about it. They woke up to find the accordion on their back porch. Their mother claims to never have put it there and their father wasn't at home much. So at the time they thought nothing of it. Till the next day where they found the accordion in the closet of their room. They know they didn't put it in there, so who could have? This next part I find hard to believe, but I have never heard my friend sound more terrified than when he tells this story. So apparently one night his friend comes and sleeps over and they hear an odd noise coming from the basement, roughly around 2 a.m. What could it be? My friend says. As they head down to the basement it becomes louder. They see a rocking chair moving and a ghostly figure playing the accordion. They nearly shat bricks as they hauled ass up the stairs. My friend believes to this day that the house was haunted, and has shared other stories with me. I once had a sleep paralysis experience. I now empathize with those who believe that they were being abducted by aliens, well, because it damn well felt like at the time. It's an interesting experience of being unable to move, hearing really loud and high-pitched tones, the feeling of being pulled upwards, all coupled with a terrible sense of something foreboding and close. Not to mention the fact that you are crafting yourself with fear. I remember telling myself over and over that this couldn't happen, aliens aren't real. 30x over. Then I was awake, looking at the ceiling and still unable to move for a further 15 seconds or so. I can tell you right now, I did not go back to sleep. If you were less wise than you're truly, it is entirely conceivable you didn't go straight on Wikipedia to work out, in my words, whatever the duck that was. I have just one. It's not too crazy, but I was never able to explain it, and what pisses me off is that I expect I'm never going to. I was about 15, late 1998 or early 1999. I had been really interested in lucid dreams, and woke up one night at 2:30 a.m. from a long and involved one. As was my habit at the time, I wrote down the whole dream in detail on a paper near my bed. While I was putting down the last few details, I heard music coming from the hallway. The house was dark and quiet, my parents were asleep, and the house is pretty small and has only 1 floor. The music wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It sounded like someone was pouring sleigh bells down a series of regular troughs. Lots of tiny tinkling notes merging into a chaotic tune. For like 30 seconds I sat on my bed, creeped out, thinking this is so surreal and where could this be coming from? Someone parked outside? And other things you think when you're 15 and awake and home alone and kind of a wimp. I finally got up the nerve to get up and walk over to the door, and the noise got louder as I did. Clearly it was coming from down the hall. I saw out through the ajar door that everything was dark. I knew that I would have to walk out there to see what it was, but it was such a strange experience and I found myself terrified of the dark hallway. So I chickened out. I backed away from the door, sat on my bed, wrapped the blanket around me, and listened. I knew I wouldn't be able to remember the music, but I tried to verify that it had a tune to it, and it did. Chaotic though it was, I could anticipate parts of the melody. And I took the piece of paper on which I had written my dream and added a note at the bottom, 2:30 a.m., strange music. Scared. And then I just stared at the doorway. About a minute and a half later, the music faded down and stopped. There was silence. I didn't know what to do. I didn't feel like sleeping. Eventually I got up the nerve to walk out my door and into my parents' room across the hall, where I stood awkwardly at the foot of their bed, not sure what I would say if I woke them up. Finally, I decided not to, and walked back into my room. I read for a while and fell asleep. The next morning, I asked my parents. They didn't know anything, and couldn't think of a piece of music that it might be. My dad suggested Tubular Bells. I've never heard it again or figured out what happened. The obvious suggestion is that I dreamed it. This doesn't fit for several reasons. 1. I've never confused a dream for a real experience after waking up. 2. I remember thinking, at the time, years from now, when the memory of this has faded, I'll probably start telling myself that it was a dream, and it'll probably help me wonder less, but I know with certainty right now that it wasn't. 3rd, I can't really write text in my dreams, let alone write a full page of narrative. 4th, I looked at the paper the next morning and saw the note. I wish I could find that paper again. But my room was always a mess of stacks of paper, and sometime in the next few years it vanished. I don't expect anyone to figure this out, I don't expect to ever find an answer, and I don't think this was anything supernatural. The lesson here, and the reason I retell this story, is this: forget what the horror movies teach you. Even if you're scared, go investigate the strange phenomenon, or you just might find yourself wondering for the rest of your life. And if you do hear this music one night and go to investigate, don't forget your towel. Copied from my previous reply in a thread about your scariest moments. Long post alert. Okay, I won't get into the discussion about whether or not ghosts exist. Just wanted to share a story with you that occurred in my life in just one place and one night only. Now, I am a numbers guy. I deal with them for a living, so the numbers add up or they do not. Black or white, as simple as that. I would like to think that most people who know me would refer to me as a down-to-earth guy, probably skeptical by nature. I believe in science and facts. But a very good friend of mine is about the most trustworthy, grounded individual I have ever met in life. Extremely practical and with an above-average level of intelligence. He had moved into a new apartment and we met for drinks shortly thereafter. At some point in our conversation he calmly states that he believes his new basement pad may be haunted. Of course I state WTF? He begins to tell me about the shenanigans going on in the bachelor suite. Seems this one battery-powered clock likes to have the hands move backwards rapidly, before always returning to the correct time, even when the battery has been removed. Also seems that someone/thing likes to line his shoes up on top of one another, slippers on top of dress shoes on top of runners, and so forth. Now all of this occurs while he, and only him, is in the basement apartment. He said the shoe thing happens about twice a day, usually while he leaves the area for less than 2 minutes. He brings his shoes into the apartment right next to the living room. The apartment is always locked and the only way in is through his one and only door. No windows that any regular-sized kid could even fit through, basement remember. So of course I think he is crafting me, but he calmly states that it has been going on every day for about 3 weeks now and invites me over. He tells me it is so frequent that he has even given it a name, Gertie. He said the name just felt right. Continued on to say that he wasn't afraid or worried in the least and felt he was in no danger as Gertie was probably just bored and yanking his chain. Bigger balls than I can assure you of that. So a few weeks go by and we are at his new pad one evening to watch the hockey game. We had only been there for about 5 minutes and stone cold sober. I had pretty much forgotten about what he had told me previously until I saw a clock on the side table. So I asked him if this was the clock and he said yes. I then asked him to remind me about the happenings with the shoes and he asked me to hang on a minute, as he suddenly wasn't feeling well. He ran to the washroom, barely made it there and began to barf violently. It was so bad I went in to see if he was okay. I had to physically lead this massive man to his bed, where he passed out immediately. Remember, we were on our first beer and absolutely nothing else. I checked his breathing and forehead temperature and he just seemed to be in a very deep sleep. Wow, okay. So what now? I remember considering calling an ambulance or taking him to the hospital, but he truly seemed fine now and was sleeping very solidly. I chalked it up to bad food, but we had both eaten the same thing earlier, and decided to hang around to make sure he was okay. I had planned to stay there for the night anyhow as my family was out of town for the weekend. So was the landlord who lived upstairs by himself. So I watched the remainder of the hockey game, checked on my butt a few times, he was still out of it, and sipped on a couple of beers. I have to admit that what had occurred freaked me out a little and I did eye the clock once or twice but saw nothing besides a perfectly functioning clock. I guess I fell asleep watching TV but I awoke suddenly to a tremendous banging. I flew off the couch and immediately went to check on my friend. He was in deeper sleep than ever but the banging was coming towards the washroom area. It was an earth-shattering, violent, rapid banging that was so loud I figured it would surely get the attention of the folks in the next house. I moved towards the washroom but was stopped by the sight of the furnace, which was in the walkway to the washroom. It was absolutely glowing hot, fireball red, the red that only something extremely intense can produce, and the banging was coming from it. This wasn't just the furnace doesn't sound right sound. I don't think I have the vocabulary to properly explain how incredibly red and loud it was there at that moment. I thought for sure the entire house was going to explode any second. I immediately ran back to my friend's bedroom and began screaming at him to get the duck up and began shaking him with a great amount of cruelty. We had to get out of there now. It probably took a minute or so until he finally partially awoke. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and banging him so hard his first words of course were WTF. As soon as he spoke, the banging stopped immediately. I tried explaining to him what had happened and took him to the furnace, but of course it looked like it almost always looked and was perfectly quiet, except for its normal operating sounds. I asked him if he was okay and he said he felt great now and asked me what happened to him earlier. I explained quickly, made sure he was okay and went the hell home. He was invited to come with me but insisted on staying. I left in a hurry. We did discuss what had occurred several weeks later. He told me he felt Gertie got jealous that I was there, or upset that he had told me the stories. He lived for another 2 or 3 years in that apartment, but I only went there rarely and certainly never attempted to spend another night. I fully expect you to rip this apart, and you are certainly welcome to, but at least in this instance, consider this non-believer beyond spooked. Edited for clarity. On my last day of work before moving to Argentina from Washington, D.C., I walked into the metro and passed by a blind homeless man that stood in the same spot almost every day for a year. I walked right by him and said, "Sorry, next time," knowing there was not going to be a next time. At the bottom of the first set of escalators, I stopped, looked into my wallet and saw a $20 bill. I thought, what the hell, I don't need it. I turned around, walked back up the escalator, and as I was approaching the blind man, I saw a woman walking toward in his direction right behind me. I put my $20 into his cup and the woman dropped in a bill as well. I went back down the escalators and while waiting for my train the same woman walked up to me. "What made you turn around and put $20 in his cup?" "It's his day, I guess." She looks at me and tells me that she did the exact same thing, walked past the blind man, turned around and put $20 in his cup. The two of us did this in tandem without knowing we were doing it until we dropped the money in his cup. I can't explain what happened, but it sent chills down my spine. I have a feeling the man really needed that money that day. A few years back. It was around 3:30 a.m., and I woke up because of a horrendous noise outside my bedroom door, which leads straight to a patio, more or less to the open. The noise could be described like this: imagine the largest array of speakers you can think of. Now imagine some pretty deep synthesizer bass sound played through all of them. It was approximately like that, although that sound was freakier. Also, it was kind of oscillating at a very slow pace, approx 4 or 5 seconds. At first, when it woke me up, I was in a semi-dreamlike state, but when I realized that it was real, and one of the loudest things I had heard, I bolted up and sat upright in my bed, listening. It seemed to be on for ages. I was relieved that I couldn't see into the patio, as, if there would have been something present, I would have probably crapped myself, and if there wouldn't, I would still crap myself, totally baffled as to the whereabouts. However, I was still kinda scared without seeing anything. On top of that, a light starting shining into my room, through the covered window. As if someone had come up the driveway. Except there was no car, and my house is isolated in that the only car that would come up the driveway would be that of our family and not just random cars driving by. I slapped myself to make sure I was not dreaming. After about 10 minutes, I realized that it was slowly getting further away, as the sound pitch got higher, and after another 5 it was gone. Maybe it was less, I didn't count. It took me a while to get back to sleep. Thank God that I wasn't fully aware of what had happened, as I think I probably wouldn't have been able to fall asleep then. I know it was real, as the first thing I did when waking up, was smack my alarm clock to, by help of the backlight, see what time it was, approx 3:30 a.m. What also freaked me out, was that the next morning while playing ping pong with my younger bro, he said that the door to the computer/living room was open, and I knew that I had closed it as the last person leaving it the night before. I had a 200-pound, square, solid dresser tip over and crash to the floor at 3 a.m., while I was right next to it. I was lying in bed with the laptop less than 2 feet away, and saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I looked up, and past the glare of the LCD I could see the shadowed corner of this huge-ass dresser tipping up, and it was so impossible that I just sat there staring blankly at it, thinking, if I thought at all, I'm not really seeing that. That isn't real. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as this huge heavy dresser, silhouetted in the hallway light, teetered up on its two front legs, leaned past the center of gravity, swayed out and then landed with the most terrific crash. It shook the whole apartment. I bet the neighbors were pleased. It scared me into a state of catatonia. I just sat there as my boyfriend raced into the room, asking me what had happened, and I couldn't move or speak. I just looked at him, then turned over in bed and sort of went to sleep from fear, something I haven't done since childhood. There was no explanation for that. Two people had to work together to move it anywhere, and I was sitting right the duck there and watched it tip out and over. It was against an outside wall in a second-floor apartment. That thing moved by itself. Nothing else could possibly have moved it short of an earthquake, and there wasn't one. In that same apartment, we had a container of coffee fall off the microwave with no one in the room, just tipped out, and there was coffee in a fan across the floor. That one's harder to call unexplained because no one was there, and I guess it could have been natural. But that dresser? No way. That was strange. When I was a third year at college, I joined the local university paper. I was given my first assignment to write about new local businesses around campus. I got the number of a local council member to get a quote from. When I call, the council member is busy, so I leave a message. After lunch I call the council member again, because he hasn't returned my call. When I get a hold of him, he claims to have already talked to someone with my name from the university paper. I am confused as I have not talked to him yet. I hang up and check around the office to see if anyone had called the council member to help me on my story, but no one has. I call him back and apologize, tell him that there must have been some miscommunication, and ask to interview him. I get some quotes from him and he gives me the number of another city official to call. I call this one and he too has already talked to someone with my name from my school's paper. At this point I am convinced that the staff is playing a practical joke on me, but after repeated inquiries everyone is as confused as me. I call the city official back, get some quotes, and he says that the person who called before asked very similar questions. At this point I am feeling I am going a bit crazy, it happens, and just play the thing off as if it was just a misunderstanding. So yeah, it could have been a very elaborate practical joke, involving the city council member and other city hall staff and the staff of the paper, but the whole thing just really put me in a strange mood, and various parts of it I have never been able to fully explain. The fact that the council member would have had to been in on it and the other city official, and why if it was a joke someone would admit to it in the end for laughs, and a few other details. This of course doesn't mean there isn't a logical explanation, just something that has always stuck out in my memory. I knew a man who was hired to be a security guard at an old homosexual man's house. The man's family had hired him because he owned a lot of valuable stuff and was just giving it away to random twinks he knew from the local community. Seriously, he would give a random guy an original Picasso for a blowjob. He didn't care, he was dying. He also had an autographed copy of Mein Kampf. Lots of priceless historical crap in this house. So his family hired this guy I knew to keep people out of the house and make sure no more Picassos just walked out of there. The guy was there basically all the time, and stayed there at night too. But at night he would hear strange noises and crap, so he would walk around and check what it was. One night, he saw a woman in dress walk down the stairs, pull out an old revolver, and shoot herself in the head. Then he saw the same thing every few nights, always about the same time of night. The woman blows her brains out, and then vanishes as the brain matter is flying everywhere. This was just one of the stories he told me, but the others were not as shocking. I believed that he saw all this, if only from how terrified he seemed as he was telling what he saw. Well, the old man died eventually, so his services were no longer required. But then the guy I knew died too. He had a stroke. Turns out he had a massive brain tumor, and the doctors told his girlfriend that he was probably hallucinating all the crazy crap he had been seeing. So, people who think they are seeing crazy crap on a regular basis, you might want to get your head checked. I'm soon to be studying chemistry at Oxford. Atheist, consider myself fairly logical when it comes unexplained phenomenon. But dowsing, I must say, confuses me somewhat. I've been interested in archaeology for a while, to the point where I've helped with a few local digs. Those who've seen the beginning of a dig site will know that you take the first few layers off of a potential site with a digger. So, we were getting one in. However, before you do any digging you have to look up water pipes and electrical wires in the immediate area so that you don't accidentally hit on and get sued. Archaeologists are poor enough, after all. Unfortunately, due to bureaucracy, we didn't get the files on time, so there wasn't really much we could do when the guy came with the digger. This guy, however, said, "Oh, it's fine," and took out a pair of coat hanger rods, cut into 2 equal lengths and bent into L shapes. He proceeded to wander around for half an hour, making notes on his clipboard. When he had finished, he showed us a rough sketch map of all the water pipes in the area. We assumed he'd been working on this batch before, and remembered the area, but he assured us that no, he'd simply used the dowsing rods to search for the flowing water. Obviously my superior, in the nicest possible way, said that we would have to wait for the official plans before we could legally do anything, secretly thinking it was a bunch of BS. He just shrugged and left. A couple of days later, we got the plans. And, well, recognized them. Now, the driver's plan wasn't perfect, it missed a couple of pipes completely, and the ones that were there were far from perfect. But they were very alike, and, in a field the size of ours, that's quite impressive. Surreal. So, for the rest of the dig that summer, every time we got a new set of untrained volunteers, they were sent out across the field with similar rods, which we made out of coat hangers, as well, in a long line, not watching each other, just waiting for the rods to swivel and connect. Most of the time they stopped in what could broadly be described as a line, along the areas that we knew there should be pipes around. It could just be psychology, or some unconscious hint the guy running it was accidentally giving. But, well, in the face of such scientific, anecdotal evidence, I found it hard to remain so skeptical. I don't believe it's magic, or part of the paranormal, but I do believe there is something unexplained going on, that nothing I've read of can satisfy. I was on the phone talking to my girlfriend, prompt 14 at the time, and she was playing with a Ouija board. She was telling me she was communicating with this guy's spirit, who had died in a car crash. Yay, I said. So I hear this swearing sound over the phone, I inquire and she replies the pointer is going around and around really fast, it usually means the spirit is Angie. She asks the spirit why is he mad, and he spells boyfriend. She denies being my boyfriend, apparently the spirit has a crush on her which she had discovered during her little talk with him. So I'm here, sitting on my couch randomly flipping through channels, I tell her I don't see why plays with dumb stuff like that. I hear the swearing again, she asks again why the spirit is mad, and she gets the same response boyfriend. She tells the spirit again that she's single, which is followed by the spelling lie. She asks how do you know? So she starts reading the letters from the board G, L, O, S, C, O, W. Babe, what does Glasgow mean? I don't know, I reply. I'm sitting here listening over the phone to this, I've happened to stop the channel on Wheel of Fortune. It's the bonus round, and the guy is just starting to reveal the answer. Glasgow. I think I sat there, staring blankly at the screen wondering if they were watching TV at the same time, to try and explain how she came up with this word. My girlfriend lived out of the city at the time, her family didn't have cable TV. That night, as I slept in bed, I rolled over and turned looking at my closet. I started to see this bright yellow flashing light, turning on and off. Mind you, my friends and I used to steal these yellow flashing lights from the construction zones near our house, and the only way to turn the lights off was to physically remove the lid from the battery enclosure. I had this thing completely disconnected sitting on my shelf, and it started flashing in the dead of the night. I ended up just putting the covers over my head and falling asleep. Craziest thing to ever happen to me. TL, Doctor version, guy's girlfriend used a Ouija board to contact spirit who predicts Wheel of Fortune bonus word, something scares the crap out of guy that night. I must have been 12 or something. A couple of friends and I were going up to the mountains on a winter day to spend the weekend at a cabin. Someone was having a birthday. On the way, we stopped by an In-N-Out joint to get some food, but there was a huge line, even by In-N-Out standards, so we ended up leaving the place later than we expected. So we continued driving up, but due to the wait, we didn't even get to the altitude the snow started at until it was nightfall. Around dusk, all the young girls in the car suddenly, all at once, stopped talking. Finally, one of the girls broke the eerie, foreboding silence. Drive carefully. I don't know why, but I'm getting a really bad feeling, as if something awful is going to happen. 30 minutes later, in the thick of the night, well, a 3-car pileup happened. One of the cars almost went off the side of the mountain. Luckily no one was hurt. The front of the car we were in was absolutely trashed. It was just so weird. All the girls were talking, singing along to the music, when, at the same second, we all stopped singing and talking. Then the feeling we all had. It's one I'll never forget. A combination of a knot in the stomach plus some kind of bizarre paralyzing fear. It's as if in the middle of the night, you are suddenly awoken to air raid sirens, and you know the sirens aren't going off for some drill. You know that an air raid is really about to happen. Imagine the fear you'd feel in that situation. That's what the girls and I felt. I was traveling, extended road trip, in the 70s and had car trouble. My clutch started slipping, I didn't have enough money to take it to a shop, and I didn't have any automotive tools. So I walked uptown where I happened to be to get some coffee and consider my prospects. When crossing a random street, I looked up the block and saw an innocuous brown paper bag sitting on the curb. I had the impression that it contained the tools I needed, but thought that so exceedingly improbable that it's irrational, and continued up to the cafe. But the impression gnawed on me, so I resolved to look on the way back. The sack contained a 3/8 snap-on swivel ratchet, several metric sockets, I had a VW, a compression tester, and a couple of open-end wrenches. Seems like there was something else too, but I don't recall. I did fix the car and kept it running for 10 years till it finally rusted apart. I still have them and have wondered who left them there. If anyone recognizes the contents, tell me the street and city and I'll send them to you with many thanks. Another time I was working in a farm shop and had a vision that I was flying into a flock of quail. I put grain out for them, and there was a flock in the field outside. I walked over to the door and was wondering what the vision was about, when a falcon flew from about 10 feet up in a tree to my left, across the drive and took a chick. The others scattered. I always suspected that the hawk used me for a stalking horse, because the quail were used to seeing me and would have had their guard down, but it doesn't explain the vision. Hawks don't use words, maybe that's how they communicate. My experience doesn't involve aliens or ghosts or anything like that. It's more of an inner experience which has confused me ever since. I wake up in the middle of the night and my heart is racing like crazy. This strange bright colorful light display starts happening when I shut my eyes. It happens when they are open, but it's way more intense when I shut them. I'm seeing this strange fractal tunnel and my body feels like it's falling down through it. The falling sensation gets greater and I do feel like I can pull away. I open my eyes for a short time and notice I'm sweating and shaking a lot. I still see the tunnel. Curious, I close my eyes and I start falling down this tunnel even faster. The sensation is getting greater and I shake even more. Then bam! The falling sensation stops as I'm greeted by a giant eye. It's very detailed and electric/fractal looking. It's like I've hit a brick wall and now everything just starts buzzing. I feel, hear and see this eye looking right at me. A gaze that engulfs all my sensations. At that point I can't take it anymore and scream and snap my body out of it. My girlfriend wakes up and is wondering what the hell went on. This wasn't a dream. I was definitely awake. Haven't experienced anything like it since. I'd love to know more about it though. Okay, this sounds a little crazy, but since you're asking, I used to smoke weed a lot in my early 20s. One time I was at home smoking bong with a friend and something just didn't feel right, hard to explain. I just had a really bad feeling, when all of a sudden my friend started to choke for no apparent reason. I saw a dark cloud occupying the same space as him. I know how crazy this sounds. Let me explain. I didn't see it with my eyes. When you visualize something, you see it in your mind. That's the way I saw this cloud thing. Now, this could have been imagination, but the interesting thing is, that I thought I saw the cloud coming. At this moment it was nothing more to me but imagination or random visual effects in my mind because of being stoned, but when he started choking at the exact moment this imaginary cloud thing moved into his body, I thought, okay, if this is some kind of supernatural thing and the bad feeling is somehow connected to what's happening, it might be possible to send it away by using/changing my thoughts. So I sat up straight and tried to visualize spreading light and thinking duck off and leave my friend alone. Now, I looked at him and saw this cloud withdrawing from him upwards and disappear through a corner. At the exact moment it left his body, he stopped choking and took a deep breath. We both were like, WTF just happened? As a teen I was heavily into psychic phenomenon. To the point where I'd even managed to convince myself that I was psychic. Even getting actual hallucinations with out-of-body experiences. And then I read a book by Susan Blackmore, a former parapsychologist. She introduced me to common sense experiments with actual strict methodology behind them. Surprise ending, I realized that not only wasn't I psychic, nobody was. Absolute loss of the foundations of my worldview. Sure, I wasn't very old. But this had been something that was the center of how I'd perceived the world for a pretty large part of my young adult life. To the point of influencing not only what I did, but who I hung out with, dated, etc. To this day I'm pretty proud of young me for going with the truth instead of retreating back into what would have been a far easier path of denial. There was some good and bad in that. The bad was that I lost some friends, and the girl I was dating at the time. The good was that it influenced me to get into psychology after graduating. With a heavy focus on learning just how the human mind manages to fool itself in situations like that. I went to an old university, one rife with ghost stories. Part of it was a former women's insane asylum. You could still go see one of the shock tubs in the basement of one of the dorms. Classic scary story stuff. I never paid much attention to it until I was visiting a friend at night in his dorm room with another friend. We were sitting around talking when all of a sudden, his door opens and shuts. We assumed it was a draft or something even though it's a heavy door and doesn't even stay open if you let it go. So we shove on it, make sure it's latched. The dude whose room it is tells us that happens a lot. A few minutes later, the door opens and shuts again. We all jump. It keeps doing this for a few minutes. I'm about to piss myself, so we all run out of the room and go to the bathroom. My friend and I had to go up a floor to the girls' bathroom. When we came back, the room's owner wasn't back yet, so we stood in the hall, staring at the door. Nothing happened, so we start to relax. Then, as we watch, the knob turns, the door opens and slams shut. We jumped about a mile. Throughout the year he had things like the door and his shades flying up for no reason. I wish I had a logical explanation, but I don't.